Now, please welcome Maggie Opplinger, General Manager and CEO of the Florentine Opera, to not only introduce today's speaker, but also our newest member at Rotary.
May no one challenge that the arts are efficient. You get a twofer. It is my great pleasure to introduce Chad Bauman to not only the club as a speaker, but also the club as a new member. I met Chad right when I started the Florentine in 2019, and I think we've had a lot of laughs and a lot of tears through the COVID times and what's come after. He is someone with a great personality and a lot of fun, and I think we'll all enjoy having him at our lunch tables. So here's a little background on Chad. Chad is in his 11th season at the Repertory Theater, and under his guidance, it has grown from a $9 million company to a $14 million plus organization. He's completed 2 capital campaigns to remodel the Stackner Cabaret, built the endowment, launched the John Lewis New Play Development Program, created a new Christmas Carol, and deepened the theater's community engagement programs. He's currently stewarding the $78 million campaign to build the new Associated Bank Theater Center. Through his efforts, the theater has been awarded UPAF's Good Steward Award 6 times and became the only performing arts organization in Wisconsin with a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. Previously, he was the Associate Executive Director at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., where he was instrumental in opening the Mead Center for American Theater, a 200,000 square feet performing arts complex dedicated to American voices and playwrights. While at Arena Stage, he worked on the Broadway transfers of Next Normal, Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Tony Award, Wishful Drinking, starring Carrie Fisher, in addition to the world premieres of Marcus Gardley's Every Tongue Confess, starring Felicia Rashad, and Red Hot Patriot, starring Kathleen Turner. He has been named to Milwaukee Business Journal's Top 40 Under 40 and a friend of the Hispanic community by the United Community Center. He currently serves as the president of the Milwaukee Arts Partners, vice president of the Board of Pathways High School, treasurer of Imagine MKE, and coordinator for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for AFS Student Exchange Programs. Bauman is a graduate of Harvard Business School's Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management program with the Master of Fine Arts in Producing from the CalArts. He and his husband Justin and son live in Whitefish Bay and have been host parents to AFS exchange students from Norway, Germany, Denmark, Poland, and Spain. Just for a little extra color, because we all like to know who our people are, Chad and his husband Justin have hosted all of those students and have a young son. He was born 3 years ago, and Chad and his family moved to Milwaukee 11 years ago from Washington, D.C., having never been anywhere in Wisconsin except for a childhood vacation to the Dells. Now they hope they never have to leave. During the summer, you can find Chad on the water at the Milwaukee Community Sailing Center, trying to improve his modest sailing skills. And I assure you, they are not modest. Mine are. And if you want to capsize, you can sail with me. If you want to have a good time, go with Chad. Chad, welcome to the club. Thank you for being here.
It's funny how life comes full circle. I just returned this weekend from a trip to the Dells because my 3-year-old loves the water parks. So there we have it. And thank you to Maggie for that generous introduction. And I'm very happy to join everybody here today for lunch. Very glad to be part of a great group of Rotarians making the city a great place to live, work, and play. I'm sorry I didn't join in my first 10 years. Sometimes I'm late to the party. But thank you very much for welcoming me. I am pleased to give you an update today on Milwaukee Repertory Theater, a little bit about the Associated Bank Theater Center, and somewhat about the arts and culture community here in southeastern Wisconsin. Well, Aaron, I'm clicking, and it's not going. It's probably me. See, I told you it was me. There we go. If you don't know that gentleman there, that's Fred Miller. Fred Miller was the president and CEO of Miller Brewing Company in the 1950s. Whoa, now that one wasn't me. There we go. Fred had an interesting vision for the city of Milwaukee to become a world-class city here about 7 decades ago. From his perspective, Milwaukee needed two things to be a world-class city. The first, it needed professional sports. The second, it needed a professional theater company. And working with some of the best civic leaders at the time, soon thereafter, we would have both. So in 1953, Fred and a couple of others went to Boston and convinced the Braves to move from Boston after 82 years. They had their first game here in Milwaukee County Stadium. Does anybody know who they played? They beat the Cardinals. Now, I'm from St. Louis, so that was a little painful, but they beat the St. Louis Cardinals. Soon thereafter, Fred also made good on his promise to bring Major League Theater to Milwaukee. So in 1953, we formed the Drama Inc., which was then the precursor to Milwaukee Repertory Theater. And we formed our first theater in 1955 as the Fred Miller Theater. If you don't know what MLT means, that means Major League Theater. Major League Baseball, Major League Theater. There we go. Soon, we established ourselves on the world stage. So some of the best stars from around the world were coming to Milwaukee. This includes Betty White, Rita Moreno, Ethel Waters, Uta Hagen, all came to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to be on the stages of Milwaukee Repertory Theater. 70 years later, Milwaukee Repertory Theater is one of the largest theater companies in the United States, and it is the largest performing arts organization in the state of Wisconsin. We serve 300,000 people every single year, 20,000 of which are students from more than 250 different school systems, through 700 performances annually on 4 different stages. So it's quite the operation from the humble beginnings that we had. Equity, diversity, and inclusion were really at the core from the beginning. There were 7 professional theater companies when we started this in the 1950s. All 7 were founded by women CEOs, including Milwaukee reps Mary John. Mary John was not just an artistic director. She was in fact the CEO. She had to convince people to invest in the company by buying stock at the time. So in the 1960s, we had our first artistic director of color. In the 1970s and 1980s, we toured Japan and Russia. In the 1990s, we had our first American Sign Language performance. And here we are in 2010 and beyond. And of the 400 artists that are on our stages every single year, more than 50% are BIPOC individuals, so that we're reflective of the communities in which we serve. We are also committed to growing Milwaukee talent. We have a training program that's more than 50 years old. That training program, more than 90% of the people that go through it are employed in the field. They have gone on to Broadway, off-Broadway, West End, and have started most of the theater companies here in the state of Wisconsin. I mentioned that we serve 20,000 students. They come to us from schools from here all the way north into Green Bay, over into Iowa, and down into the state below us that shall not be named. And they come to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for our innovative programs that are based in literacy and social emotional learning. We are also a huge economic driver. If you take all the 14 member groups of the United Performing Arts Fund, we represent 1/3 of their combined performances, which about a $30 million economic impact in downtown Milwaukee, and we're growing significantly. We've doubled in size in the last 10 years, and we have not had a single year of a deficit budget. But, of course, we wouldn't be a nonprofit performing arts organization if there wasn't some sort of challenge on the horizon. I call that job security, by the way. So let me tell you what our challenge is. You may have read from the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, that post-pandemic recovery has been very slow for the field. The largest theaters in the United States are closing theaters, they're shutting down productions, and they're laying off staff. However, Milwaukee is a positive outlier. I was at my office about 2 months ago, and I received a phone call from the Wall Street Journal. And they said, we're looking at all the data from the largest theater companies in the United States, and yours is very much different than what's going on in Milwaukee? Can you tell me what's happening? And they rightfully pointed out that Milwaukee is one of the most interesting case studies for positive growth in the country at this time. 2 months previous to that, the Milwaukee Business Journal published a story on us saying that we have another story to tell, that of successful fundraising, growing audience numbers, overall enthusiasm, and we are a professional theater company that's doing it right. But our challenges in our physical infrastructure are building itself. And if we do not address this challenge and solve it today, it will severely limit our ability to deliver upon mission. So these are some of the critical moments of transformation in our history. I like the photograph all the way to the left because that's Mary John Sullivan telling all the men how her theater is going to be. And that's in 1953. And in 1955, we opened the Fred Miller Theater. There, 13 years later, we outgrew the Fred Miller Theater and we moved into the Marcus Performing Arts Center. We were in the Marcus Performing Arts Center for 19 years and we outgrew it. In 1987, we opened the Baker Theater Complex. That same year, two other iconic buildings in Milwaukee opened as well. One, the Bradley Center, and two, the Marcus Amphitheater. Both of those buildings have been demolished and replaced by American Family Insurance Amphitheater and the Pfizer Forum because they could no longer serve the purpose in which they were built. We have a very similar challenge today. So in 2025, we will be opening the Associated Bank Theater Center. In 2018, I was driving to work and I came to the front door and there were a whole bunch of fire engines outside and I thought, I might as well just go home. This day is not going to be good. And come to find out, what happened was we had a freight elevator fire overnight, and the part that caused the fire hadn't been manufactured in decades. What we were doing to repair our freight elevator was going on eBay and buying used parts that were 20 plus years old. And it was causing major problems. Obviously, in this case, it was a fire. So we hired Auerbach, Pollock, and Freelander to do an institutional study on our facility. They spent an entire year with us, opened up walls, looked at systems, and delivered this huge 200-page report to our board of trustees. I'll boil it down to 4 points. The first, nobody expected Milwaukee, Wisconsin to have one of the 10 largest theater companies in the United States. It just simply wasn't built for 300,000 people. So there's a lot of wear and tear on the facility. The second, as you can imagine, how we produce theater today is very different than how we produced theater in the 1980s. When we have directors and designers come to us now, they're oftentimes working on and with technology that is older than they are. The third is that all of our systems need replacement, even though we've kept up with them. So imagine if you haven't renovated a kitchen in 40 years. They just don't have any parts to replace things that break. And then the fourth is that we are a talent-based business and our audiences have high expectations of the artists and the comfort of the facility. If we do not meet those expectations, we're going to be in serious jeopardy. We also have some unusual operating challenges. Even though we're one of the largest providers of arts education, we have no dedicated educational space in the facility. That's because when the facility was built, arts education at that time was happening in the schools itself. The second, when the building was built, it was before the Americans with Disabilities Act, so our ability today to serve persons with disabilities is very minimal. We also have no unified public lobby, so if you've been to our facility, you park in the underground parking, you come up, you go into the River Center, and you are lost. You have no clue where our theaters are at, so people get lost along the way. Ladies, I don't have to tell you, we have undersized restrooms. It's a major issue. We're energy inefficient, and then of course we're spending about $1 million every single year just to repair an aging facility, which should be going to our education programs or mission-driven programs as well. So we gave this laundry list of problems to EUA architects, and we said, oh, by the way, we want to stay in our historic building in downtown Milwaukee. And I'm pleased to share with you their design solution.
Welcome to our new entrance off Well Street, where patrons can access our theaters on the ground floor and drop off vehicles for valet. Patrons will enter the Hack Grand Lobby, which is a 3-floor gathering space built off of our historic building. The Hack Grand Lobby will unite for the first time all theaters and public spaces and provide easy access to all spaces for persons with disabilities. The Hertzfeld Foundation Education and Engagement Center will help us serve 30,000 students and community members annually with dedicated space to our training and student programs, including a performance space and individual classrooms. The Studio Theater will have a magnificent new lobby connected to a fully flexible performance space in which audience seating can change depending upon the needs of individual productions. Heading to the second floor of the Hack Lobby, patrons can enjoy many amenities, such as coat check, gift shop, bars, ample seating, and event spaces that can be used for pre-show and post-show events. From the second level, patrons will enter the back of the orchestra level of the Powerhouse Theater. The Powerhouse Theater will be the first and only theater in the United States that can convert from a thrust to a proscenium audience configuration, making Milwaukee Rep's flagship theater compatible with every theater in the world, giving us the ability to move our productions to Broadway and beyond. Moving to the third level, you can see the beautiful skylight that will connect our historic building to our lobby. On this level, patrons can access the Stackner Cabaret and Powerhouse Theater balcony. Additionally, it will feature a stunning Lubar Family Donors Lounge with the capacity to serve 125 people with private restrooms, bar, and food service. An evening at the Associated Bank Theater Center will be a memory to cherish for decades of theater lovers to come.
So it took 6 years in planning because we had a little global pandemic in the middle of that. But in the last 2 years of our campaign, we've had more than 100 volunteers working on this. 500 plus private donors, foundations, and corporations have made gifts. And as of today, we've raised $71.2 million. Quite a feat. But one of the areas where I'd like to dive a little bit deeper is that these cultural infrastructure projects across the country almost always have public support behind them because they bring public good to the community, which dives into more of a discussion on the public funding of arts and culture here in the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee County, and the city of Milwaukee. If I were to ask you, out of all 50 states on a per capita basis, where do you think Wisconsin ranks in terms of public support for the arts? You don't count. Nope, you know the answer. Okay. We are the worst. We are number 50 out of 50. In terms of local support, let's drill down. Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee. Out of the 60 largest DMAs in the United States, on a per capita basis, where do you think public funding of arts and culture is? Let's start with Milwaukee County. Where do you think we're at? Yep, you guessed it. We are the worst out of the top 60. Let's go to the city of Milwaukee. Might as well make it a trifecta at this point, right? You guessed it, we are the worst. So in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I make the argument that we are one of the most challenged communities in terms of public support for the arts. It's always hinged upon private philanthropy. So if you take a look at the state of Wisconsin, the state invests 14 cents per resident on public funding of the arts. If you look at our neighboring states, all of them, by and large, invest 30 to 55 times more than we do. And we are trying to compete for talent out of these states as well. So if you drill down into Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee, you're talking about billions of dollars of public investment. Combined, they support, through CAMPAC and the Arts Board, $670,000 out of those billions. With an estimated $7 billion surplus at the state of Wisconsin, we, in fact, in Wisconsin, support the arts from the public basis worse than Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia, or the poorest states in the country. If you go to the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we reinvest 0.3% of the economic impact of this sector into arts and culture. Drill down into the city itself, in a budget of about $1.9 billion or so, it's a $250,000 investment, which is less than 0.1% of the city budget. We are also the only community out of those top 60 not to have a public office of arts and culture. So this is the public sector support environment that we are in. But we know, according to Arts and Economic Prosperity, which is the gold study of economic impact from Arts Americans for the Arts, that the sector has a $334 million impact every single year. That impact supports 4,550 jobs, and it gives back $58 million in tax revenue. Now, if you have a budget problem, and I said for every dollar you gave me, I was going to give you $407 back, wouldn't you invest more? Seems like a pretty easy no-brainer to me. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where we've had recent bipartisan legislation success in other areas that are state civic institutions. Primarily the most recent being American Family Field. Before that was the Fiserv Forum. All of those will have significant returns on our community, but make no mistake about it, this is a critically underinvested sector, and if the public sector support doesn't increase, you will start to see a collapse of arts and culture institutions in this community, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 1950s. So, if you're one of those people that think, well, theater is nice to have, but it's not really essential, I hope to change your mind on that today. You might recognize this slide. I stole this slide from last week's speaker. I thought it was so good that it decided that it needed to have a resurfacing. One of the things that we are wrestling with at this time in the country is the divisiveness that we are all facing. And this is a slide that shows that the divisiveness in the United States Congress is greater than it's ever been since the post-Civil War. Our country literally is being pulled apart. And if we're in a situation where everybody feels like they have to shout louder and louder to get attention, nobody is slowing down to have nuanced, civil conversation. And we shouldn't be surprised about this. Division is big business. There's lots of people making money off of books and podcasts and you name it, social media. And so what this is doing is driving us apart, and it's causing us to look at what separates us, not at what brings us together. And as we struggle with empathy and understanding, we're also struggling with critical thinking. I'm surprised today that people struggle as much with the concept that two truths can be true at the same time. If you look at this illustration, depending upon your perspective, it can be a 6 or it can be a 9, but at the same time, both can be true and nobody is lying. Critical thinking is something that is reinforced every single day at Milwaukee Repertory Theater. The founders of the regional theater movement forecasted the role that we were going to play. In fact, you might have remembered I said that we were founded as a for-profit company. That was because nonprofits didn't exist. They didn't exist until the 1960s. At the time, we went ahead and we made an argument to Congress that our greatest return to a community is not going to be an economic return, even though we have economic impact. But in fact, our greatest return is that we are an instrument of civilization. We build empathy, we deepen understanding, we engage community, and that is really our value position. And as such, we should be publicly funded like libraries, universities, and hospital systems. Theater, I would argue, and of course I am biased, but I believe it does this better than anybody else in the performing arts. It brings people together for a shared live experience. It challenges audiences to view plays through the eyes of each other and those that are different than themselves, and it asks us to exercise empathy and understanding in ways in which we are challenged in other parts of our lives today. The bottom line, and simply put, every single time we have thousands of people that come through our theaters, we are both the best vaccine and the cure for this division that we see in the world. And looking ahead, Milwaukee is probably one of the best positioned cities in the nation if we can just remember that what unites Wisconsinites is far greater than what divides us. Building community every day of the year are venues with 15,000 theater seats just within a few blocks of each other. The Milwaukee Theater District ranks #1 in the United States outside of New York for the highest number of theater seats per capita. And soon, adding to that, in 2025 specifically, will be the Associated Bank Theater Center, which will redefine world-class theater going not only for our region, but the country. We would love for you to join us and take part in creating something that's extraordinary and will serve decades of Milwaukeeans to come. I know this is small, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank the individuals on this screen. This is part of the 100+ volunteers that are working on this, from our campaign co-chairs, our board, cabinet, senior advisors, but also every dollar that we're spending, for the most part, with our largest providers are here local. And those dollars are going to EUA, Hunsinger Construction, Chamberlain, so that they are kept in this community. I would like to thank them for their leadership and for providing this great gift to Milwaukee. Milwaukee Rep is proud to rep Milwaukee, and we look forward to serving you and your loved ones soon in one of our theaters, in one of the hundreds of schools that we support, or in a community-based program in your neighborhood. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and if I don't have the answer, I will make it up and you won't know any different. Sound good? Okay. And my clock says 20 minutes exactly, so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
If you have a question for Chad, you may do so by using this microphone here. And as always, please keep your questions topical and concise. Thank you.
Two quick questions, Chad. Number one, what's the total that you need over and above the 71.2? And second is talk about the transition while you're doing the construction with the theater as an ongoing entity.
Yes, and oh gosh, I'm going to answer your question accurately and honestly, and yet I know that our PR director is going to have a nightmare because I'm going to be breaking news here. The total project cost for the building itself is now $78 million. We have announced that it's $75 million 2 years ago. Between the last 2 years was 20% inflation. Our inflation is less than 5%. So if we want to cover the entire cost of the building, the differential between the cost of the project and what we've raised today is $6.8 million, and we're trying to get that done by the time we break ground in May of this year. In the interim, it's a really fascinating, and really I should have Melissa Vartanian, our managing director, come up here and talk about this because she's the one that's stewarding all this. But it's a fascinating operational plan. So before the pandemic, we were going to drop operations and perform in alternate venues all over southeastern Wisconsin. During the pandemic, we had to stop all operations, and we understood fully that the impact we have when we stop all of our operations is significant on local businesses. And so we don't want to have the same operational disruption on their businesses. So we have decided that as we are constructing the Associated Bank Theater Center, it's going to be done in phases, so that we're going to be able to operate in 2 of our theaters while the third is being built, and then just rotate them out. Even with doing that, we're going to have a need to perform in some alternate venues, and I'm very thankful for Kevin here for the Marcus Performing Arts Center, because they are welcoming us back next year as a resident there, and we will be having one show out at the Sharon Lynn Wilson Center in Brookfield.
Thank you very much for your information today. You had 2 sets of data that are seemingly very contradictory but interesting. We're the worst at publicly supporting arts on a per capita basis. But if I heard you right, we have the most opportunities per capita to consume the arts. What's driving that dynamic? Is it
The private sector.
I was going to say, is the private sector supporting the arts in such a way that makes it available, but
So
public sector not seeing the need to support it?
And it's probably, I don't want to, well, maybe I will pontificate on why I think that's happening. The private sector has been so strong in philanthropy since the founding of UPAF in 1965, right? That the world-class artistic community that we have here is 100% driven by private philanthropy. That's donors, corporations, and businesses. I also believe that it's left the public sector off the hook. They don't believe that they have to invest. The problem with that now is that the ecosystem has grown to a place where it can no longer be supported just on private philanthropy, and there are other needs in the community that need private support as well. So it will right-size itself. The balance of having 15,000 theater seats, if we like that, cannot be held uplifted by private philanthropy alone. It's got to have some public support. So Milwaukee's got a decision to make. It's either going to continue to enjoy the cultural ecosystem that it has, or that ecosystem will start to diminish because of the lack of public support. Oh, by the way, the Public Policy Forum called this in 2015. They did a study on this. I think you're going to hear from Rob Hagan here in maybe a week or two. Rob might talk about it, but in 2015, they forecasted this was going to happen.
I really enjoyed Run Bambi Run. Will that show tour outside of Milwaukee? Is there a market for that?
That's a great question. So, yes. So the goal now is that's a great example, to create new world premieres here about Wisconsin-based stories that can catch the imagination nationally, and then we can take that show and bring it to other communities around the country. You will see a future life for that show. We're trying to figure that out now. We're trying to get commercial investors lined up for a potential New York transfer, but it will have a future life in some way. And by the way, when that happens and we export productions created in Milwaukee, that reinforces Milwaukee's brand as a hub of creativity and innovation, and it does good things for everybody.
Chad, is there a plan to have productions come here and with this, rehab, have that capability to bring in world-class productions from elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is can we accept productions from elsewhere? And the answer to that is yes. However, the mission of Milwaukee Rep is a producing theater, which means by and large, every single thing that you see on our stages has been produced. We have created it in-house by hand by hundreds of artists that live and work in Wisconsin. So we are committed to continuing that as a model going forward. Every so often we will bring in a tour, but primarily the touring part of the Milwaukee economy really is at the Marcus Performing Arts Center, which brings in tours from Broadway and them. So they are more so a presenting house. We are a producing house, and we've lived. We're very symbiotic in that relationship, and I think it serves Milwaukee well.
David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times in this past opinion section on Sunday, said the same thing as you, that the arts are essential in bringing people together and seeing someone else's point of view. And his concern was that there's a lack of awareness about the need for the arts, just as you were saying. And if it's so true that we're a trifecta of worseness here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, what can we all do to help change this? It's so essential that this be done.
More people attend professional performing arts organizations in the state of Wisconsin than attend the Brewers and the Bucks combined. So one of the reasons why we have a lack of public support is that we have not been able to mobilize the voice to support that activity in the state of Wisconsin. We have to do a better job telling our elected representatives how important this is, because they respond to us. So at the very base of that question is a responsibility on us to organize and tell our stories better and to talk to our elected representatives. Going back to the first part of that question, in 2015, we launched this new program called Act 2, and we commissioned a new work called American Song, which was a new play from the perspective of the father of a school shooter, and it took on gun violence in the United States. And we don't back away from hot button issues at Milwaukee Rep, but we are also not simplistic or didactic in our storytelling either. These complex issues live in the gray area of life. It's not white or black. My artistic director is UK. He came from a place that didn't have any guns. I grew up on a rural farm in Missouri, and I was shooting by the time I was 4. So our perspectives were very different on guns, for example. And we produced this play, and we asked everybody to have a responder after this play. And we invited people from Wisconsin Anti-Violence all the way to Wisconsin Carry. One believes that a good guy with a gun kills a bad guy with a gun. The other one believes that there should be no guns altogether. And so they're very different perspectives. But after each, we invited our audiences to gather over a table with a glass of wine and to talk about it civilly. And 4,000 people went through that process. So we are not in the business of telling people what they should believe. We are in the business of rebuilding those muscles that have atrophied around civil discussion.
You mentioned, Chad, about the participation of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, youth in particular. If you could touch more on youth programming and training.
Yeah, so it's actually the largest growing section of our budget in the last 10 years. My my background is as a teacher. I have a degree in education. And so and we are all founded, if you're a professional nonprofit theater in the United States, our 501c3s are as educational institutions. And so our work, not only in our theaters, but in schools, are very important. Our primary partner is the Milwaukee Public School Systems, although we work with schools all over the state. And our primary activity is our reading residency program. Those of you that were around maybe in 2015, 2016 might recall the Greater Milwaukee Foundation's Vital Signs report, which indicated that if reading metrics were behind in middle school, it just lined up a whole domino effect that was bad. If you can't read in middle school, you can't read in high school. You won't graduate from high school. You can't get a job. If you can't get a job, you get in trouble with the police. If you get in trouble with the police, you end up in jail. It just was one after the other. So we decided to concentrate in literacy. Here, 10 years later, we have multiple studies from UWM on the efficacy of this program, and it shows that it significantly increases literacy and social emotional impacts. Post-pandemic world, kids are trying to catch up and they're behind. And so there's a significant demand now that we have an inability to serve just because of the demand. So in this new building, there's the Hertzfeld Center for Education and Engagement that should allow us to serve an additional 10,000 students every year to help meet that demand.
I've always found it interesting that we seem to be a hub in many ways. You know, all the way out to the 10 Chimneys, we've had a lot of theater around us. How else do we get that word out to really promote it?
That's happening. It's interesting. Again, I keep pointing to the post-pandemic world. Things have changed and changed significantly. Just this year, and we're grateful for the recognition, but just this year, the Chicago Tribune ranked as one of the top 10 performances in Chicago, Run Bambi Run in Milwaukee. Last time I checked, Milwaukee is not in Chicago. But I'm very grateful for being included in that list. When I first started at Milwaukee Repertory Theater, we were bringing productions from Chicago to Milwaukee. The last couple of relationships we've had with Chicago theaters, we have sent work from Milwaukee to Chicago. It's starting to be noticed. It's starting to be noticed nationally. The Wall Street Journal is calling us. So I think this is not just Milwaukee Rep. I think Milwaukee as a city is having a moment. We've hosted the DNC. We're getting ready to host the RNC. This community responded better, by and large, to COVID impacts than other communities had. Our downtown is booming in comparison to other communities. I mean, I think San Francisco has a 40% office building vacancy right now, which is destroying their cultural community. So Milwaukee is poised to do really well in the coming years. And I personally believe that as people come out with more student loans, they're not going to be able to afford the $10,000 a month rents in New York, Chicago, or LA. They're going to come to cities like ours, and we need to have the amenities to attract them.
Thank you, Chad.
Great, thank you.